I remember the SS marching through the streets singing, when Jewish blood drips from our knives, then everything is going to get better. The Germans really wanted to catch every Jew. I was with my mother hiding in a little room, and the Nazis just stormed in. The next day we were taken east by train. We jumped down, we saw we were on a platform, and it was Auschwitz. And the next command was men and women to different sides. It was the last time we were together as a family. Sometimes we woke up when the people next to us had died in the sleep. And nearly gave up. But you know, I was stubborn. I didn't want to die, I wanted to experience life. And one day, when the Russians were coming, the Germans had fled, taking most of the inmates with them. Miracle that we didn't go. After the war, I was very angry with the whole world. People could have helped. We still do terrible things. But we have hope that things will get different. I've got a good tip for President Trump, that if he wants to make America big again, he has to get people educated. We have to learn from history.
They say that the human race is doomed, that we have lost touch with our true nature, that the media has corrupted us, and that the planet has no future. I disagree. I believe that humanity is full of hope, and that our salvation lies within each one of us. My name is Brian Rose, and my job is to listen, the oldest method of learning known to man. Each week I seek out individuals that are changing the world, people who are living and thinking in a different way. Their stories will challenge your beliefs, make you question your choices, and perhaps inspire you to change. I never planned on doing any of this, but now I can't stop. Join me on this mission and make humanity something we can all be proud of.
It's time for you to man up, to once and for all tell your mind who the fuck is boss. I need a fucking answer. What's it gonna be?
I don't know what it is about this fucking sport, but it attracts people that really need to do deep work on themselves.
I failed in this city. All these bad memories. I never really felt like I gave a fuck about me or my life. I almost killed myself, like.
Think about something that is going to drive you when it really hurts. Some kind of demon you want to fight.
This is not Pussy Man, this is Iron Man. Under pressure reveals true character. What are you gonna do? You're gonna be in Chattanooga, May 20th or what?
Eva Schloss is extremely unique because she is one of the few remaining Holocaust survivors. She's also the stepsister of Anne Frank, which you know from the Diary of Anne Frank, the story of a young girl in hiding in Amsterdam during the Nazi occupation. And I'm so glad I had this conversation with Eva, because it's easy to forget what happens when you don't have it told with someone who was there. And Eva has a harrowing story. She grew up in Austria and everything was okay. And she slowly watched the Nazi party come into power. She went into hiding when she was in Holland. And then on her 15th birthday, she was snatched out of her house and shipped to Auschwitz, where she had a year in captivity, fearing for her life every single day. She was separated from her mother and her father and her brother, but then she was liberated by the Russians and made it out. To me, when she described it, it sounds like the most incredible year anyone could have in their life, full of despair and terror and trauma. She met the doctor, Joseph Mengele. She thought she was going to die almost every single day. And it was a really sobering tale. And when I went home at night and I tried to tell this story to my daughter, it was very difficult. And so this story is worth listening to. So I just want to thank Eva for spending the time and going through all this detail. I think telling the story takes a lot out of her, but we cannot forget that this happened so recently in our history, and we must do everything we can to make sure it never happens again. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Eva.
London Real doesn't stop when the conversation ends. You see, that's when we get started. Because everything begins with a thought, and then comes the action. The London Real Academy is our global transformation platform. Here we bring together thousands of students from over 75 countries. Whether you want to build a profitable business from your passion, or learn to speak to inspire, or broadcast yourself with your very own podcast, or accelerate your life to become a high-performance person, we have the online accountability course and personal mentoring program that will make your dream a reality. Join us, and we'll take your life to the next level, together. Our next accelerator course is starting soon.
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Eva Schloss, the Holocaust survivor, educator, and peace activist. In 1944, your family was captured by the Nazis and transported to the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, where you and your mother survived until you were freed in 1945. You're also the stepsister of Anne Frank, whose book, The Diary of Anne Frank, has been published in over 60 languages and tells the story of a 13-year-old girl hiding in Amsterdam from the Nazis. In 2012, you were awarded the MBE, and you have written 3 detailed books about your experiences. Eva, welcome to London Real.
It's a pleasure.
It's great having you here. We were just talking about London and how much it changed. When did you move to this city?
I moved for 1 year in 1952 from Amsterdam. I was going to be a photographer, and Otto Frank, who was my house friend with my mother. At the time they were not married yet. They were just very friendly, and he helped me a lot because I was very, very, very miserable. And so after school I didn't really know what to do with my life, and I didn't really care. And Otto and my mother decided I should become a photographer. And was, you know, okay, why not, you know. And Otto gave me his Leica, because he used to take a lot of very nice pictures of his family and children. But he said, I have no family anymore, so I'm never going to take any more photos. So he gave me this very good camera, and he said, I hope you'll become a successful photographer. And he found me a place in London where I became an apprentice in Woburn Place. And so I moved to London for a year, and another friend who I had known from Amsterdam who had moved to London found me a little lodging in Cricklewood. And it was a Czech lady who ran a little boarding house. And there were about 6-7 people. And there was a young man from Israel who had studied economics. And we became friends, and later became my husband. And then we decided to stay here. But my intention was really just a year to come here.
Okay, probably good for you to get out of Europe and come to a new place.
But that's right, that's what Otto said, will do you good to see something different.
Right.
But at that time I was actually quite shocked about London. First of all, in '52, that was still full of bomb sites. really big holes and very neglected. And in Holland, I mean, we were not well off, but we had a little apartment with central heating and double glazing and so. And here we had just open fires, and we had when you had a bath, because there was other people, so we had to share a bathroom. We had to pay a penny in to get hot water, and an outside toilet, you know, which we had never ever experienced. Even in Austria, where I was born, in Vienna, in the 30s, we had all these facilities. And we were always told that England, that is an advanced country with all the innovations and the modern and the fashionable. And then when I came to London, I was really shocked. And no food really, you know, just buns and cup of tea and a bit of salad and and in 52 there was still food rationing, which we didn't have anymore in Holland, and certainly not in Germany.
Wow.
So it was really a culture shock.
Very poor, food rationing, dirty. You talked about the smog, the fog, the bad air.
Yeah, it was really amazing. And we thought this is an advanced modern country.
Wow. And the Otto who gave you the camera, that was your stepfather at the time?
Not at that time.
Okay.
But so I became very friendly with this Israeli boy, and after 6 months he said, Eva, I fall in love with you, let's get married, and when I finished my studies we can start a new life, go to Israel. And I said, no thank you, because I have a widowed mother in Amsterdam, and you can imagine we were very, very, very close, and I couldn't imagine I would just desert her. So Otto Frank came very often to London, keep an eye on me, you know. Already he realized I needed a bit of guidance. And I told him that this young man has asked me to marry him, but of course I'm not. And he got a bit embarrassed, and he said, well, when you get settled, your mother and me have fallen in love as well, and we'd like to get married. So I went back to this young man and said, we can marry now, which we did. We went to Amsterdam and we got married there. And Otto and my mother got married a year later.
Wow.
And so that's why he became my stepfather.
Okay. And so Otto Frank was the father of Anne Frank,
Of Anne Frank,
who
correct.
survived her in the war.
He was the only one who survived his family. His 2 girls and his wife died. His wife in Auschwitz and the 2 girls in Bergen-Belsen.
Wow.
Which was the Auschwitz, where I stayed, was liberated in January by the Russians. But Bergen-Belsen was liberated in 1944, no, 45, in April 45, by the British. And she must have died a little bit before the liberation.
Right, okay. And I want to talk later about how Otto, you know, was with you after the war.
Yeah.
I was wondering if we could start about where you were born.
In Vienna, in 1929, in a very wonderful family with aunts and uncles and grandparents and an older brother. And my father had inherited a shoe factory from his father, and he was a very, very good businessman. And so we were not rich, but we were comfortable. And he was he was a daredevil, very sporty, and he was one of the first people in the 30s to buy a car. And we did excursion into the mountains, and he and me, I was as well this sporty. My brother, he was more, later on we realized, he was very artistic and more gentle. But I was really the tomboy in the family.
Okay.
So I went always with my father mountaineering and things like that. And my mother and brother went with us, but they never went on daring things. They just watched somewhere in a cafe and waited till we came down.
Did you drive the car as well?
My father drove very well.
Okay.
And you know, going up mountains, those bends, And my mother just started screaming, you know, the roads were not that good at the time. And it was actually quite dangerous. But anyway, my father loved all that, and so did I.
And what was Vienna like then in the 1930s?
Well, I thought it was a lovely city, but when I went back for the first time in the 70s, I was shocked because it was very, very neglected. So it must have been already not that marvelous in the 30s, but I was very happy there. We lived in a suburb near the palace, Schönbrunn, and we went, when we were little, we had a maid, and she took us always to this big park, and yeah, I was very, very happy there. On Sunday, my grandfather took me to a pub. He always went with his friends for a beer, and I always got a nice soup, which I loved, so that was a very special treat for me. And yeah, it was just lovely. In the summer we went to Italy, because that was what people did at the time for a month, and then we went for a month into the mountains. I was very, very skinny, I wouldn't believe it now, and I hated food, I didn't eat much. I could have lived on spaghetti, but I had to eat all the vegetable and fish and things with bones. And so I was a really bad eater and very skinny, and I was sent to a sanatorium to put on weight. And I got cod liver oil on a spoon, which is horrible, and I was sick. So eventually they didn't want me there. They said, pick up your daughter, she's sick all the time. So, but I didn't put on weight, but I was very healthy.
Okay. And this is after World War I. What is the feeling like? Is the economy difficult? Are people still trying to recover from the war? What's it like?
Well, in the 30s, of course, I must say I didn't experience that, but it definitely was the case. But you know, we were at the 30s, people were not that demanding, you know. If you got a little bit of food, you know, you were satisfied. You didn't have all these luxuries that kids have now, you know. Like I say, we went on holiday and all that, but we had a seamstress mending our clothes. Didn't go out and buy clothes all the time, or really, in a way, very, very simple.
Simple, content.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you know, if you, on a birthday, if you got I got from a friend, I got always bananas, for instance, you know, which I didn't like anyway, but you know, you didn't get huge birthday presents or big treats. If you kids didn't have a watch, or my brother got for his 12th birthday a watch, you know, that was fantastic, or a fountain pen. You know, we were all very satisfied with little.
Okay.
And this is what I tried to install in our daughters when they grew up, but it didn't work, I'm afraid.
And at the time when you're there, do you know that you're Jewish? Are you with other families?
Definitely.
You definitely know you are.
So we were not at all religious, but you had to, well, there are two different things. You had to belong to a religious community. So Catholic people, because Austria was Catholic, there was practically nothing else, Catholics and Jews, and they had to register with a church community.
Okay.
And Jewish people had to register with a synagogue community. The birth certificate and all that was from a Jewish community.
So every child had to choose a religion at birth.
Well, the parents, belonging.
And everyone had some religion they were associated
they
with.
might not use it, and might not be religious,
Okay.
but you had to belong to something.
Okay.
And the tax was as well, partly the state tax, but partly the church or the synagogue was a tax.
Would tax you as well?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And the other thing was, when you went to school, you had to have religious education. That was one of the subjects. And so the Jewish children were called out of their class, and we had Jewish education. And after this hour, about 2 or 3 times a week, and afterwards we went back to our class where the Catholic children had Christian education, and so everybody knew who was a Jew.
Okay. Did you feel different than the Catholic kids?
No, no, I didn't feel different.
Okay.
I mean, I accepted that I was Jewish, and that was all right. Nobody said anything about it, and that was perfectly all right. But that changed immediately in 1938 when Hitler's Nazis just marched in. There was no fighting, they just marched in and took over, and our friends and the whole city became amazingly anti-Semitic from one day to the next.
Just completely anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
And you said the Austrians were in some ways more anti-Semitic than the Germans.
Later on, it turned out many of the Nazis, they all became Nazis, were commanders in camps and things like that.
Wow. Do you
yeah.
remember the Nazis coming in? Do
Yeah,
you remember the flags?
I remember, the flags and the Heil Hitler salute, I remember. And it was a great, great shock, because there was supposed to be a election if people wanted or not. And it looked as if people didn't want it. But that was, Hitler really didn't wait for that. So he marched in before this.
Okay.
And there was something else which I never realized, but I heard that recently. Jewish people were taken out of their homes, and with little brushes they had to clean the pavements. And I thought, peculiar, why should we clean the pavements, you know? But it was because before the election there was a lot of, no, we don't want occupation by the Germans. So, and that they had to wash away, the no, which I'd never realized what it was about, you know.
And how did the Jewish people feel about the Nazis at first?
Well, in Vienna, Austria, we knew already, well, not with children, but adults knew what had happened in Germany. Because by 1938, there were already a lot of attacks, and Jews lost their jobs, and terrible things already.
Okay.
So we knew. The Germans didn't know that at the time when Hitler came to power. And you know, that's why many people didn't try to escape. But Otto Frank, he always told us, when he saw the SS marching through the streets singing, that is a famous Nazi song, when Jewish blood drips from our knives, then everything is going to get better. When he saw that, and they marched through the street singing that, he realized this is not a country where I want to bring up my children, and they left already in 1933.
Okay, so Otto had been in Germany.
Yeah, he
and
lived
he heard
in
that
Frankfurt.
in 1933.
Yeah.
Okay, so he knew.
He realized.
Early.
But a lot of people thought it can't last. You know, the Germans won't choose a man like Hitler. But this is, you know, like coming back to the, and this is what I always, to adults and to older kids, tell about how this Hitler, because he was an uneducated Austrian, not a politician, how did they follow a man like that? You know, this is really unbelievable, because Germany was supposed to be the best educated, the cultured country in Europe, and that they would follow somebody who was really a nobody. And that was because the Versailles Treaty was really, really, really very unjust and bad for the Germans and Austrians, of course. And the Weimar Republic, it became a republic, tried many, many things to improve things, but never succeeded. There were many different governments trying to get work again, and they had to pay a lot of money to their allies, and there was really unbelievable poverty. I heard those stories from my mother and grandmother, that there was no food, starving, and no work, and kids walked barefoot in the street in the winter. And so and they didn't improve. And then Hitler said, I know things get better. And people said, well, we are not losing anything, let it try. And somehow he was the one who said everybody will be a car, a Volkswagen, car for the people, and he built the Autobahn, that was the first person in the world really who had this idea. And somehow he got money and things improved.
So he gave them their prosperity back and their dignity back.
Yeah, that's right. And so of course even Jewish people joined the Nazi party in the beginning then. They said, well, yes, he will help us to get again our honor back and to be well off and all that. And yeah, and then he started, of course, with his anti-Semitism to get more followers.
Is that?
And this is, you know, anti-Semitism, I mean, we see now, it's again everywhere a little bit. I don't compare it with the Nazi time, but it is there in people, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it is in the surface, sometimes it is really bad open, and sometimes it is just there. But you just have to light it with a little bit of something and it flares up. And that is what happened. So Hitler blamed the Jews for losing the war and for all the poverty and for all that. And people went along.
Is it because he needed a scapegoat? He needed something?
He needed a scapegoat, and he wanted, I mean, not everybody wanted to follow him, so he needed really more followers. And so this is what he got.
Wow.
And then the other thing was Russia had become communist, and when countries are so poor, the communists become powerful. And there were in Germany and Austria, there were a big communist party. And there were street fights between the Nazis and the communists. And like now again, you know, the world was more afraid of the communists than of the Nazis. This is really very, very important. So England as well, you know, the king who luckily didn't become king, admired Hitler, that he was able to put Germany back on its feet. And so was the church, and so were all the middle class in England. Everybody was afraid of communism, not realizing that the danger is really Hitler. And the only one who saw through it was Churchill. Because the one, don't know if you've seen this movie now, about Churchill.
Yes.
He had to really fight to get, because the government wanted to make peace with Hitler.
And so Churchill saw that that was the wrong thing.
Churchill saw he was a dangerous
because
person.
everyone was afraid of communism.
Yeah.
Because Russia was big and they thought it was just a different way of doing the economic system. But the real danger was...
Well, the rich people in England, who were the powerful people at the time, you know, didn't want communism to spread perhaps to England. Right. And the Vatican as well supported Hitler. And, well, everybody, America certainly. And, you know, in the McCarthy, was in the 50s, still being afraid of communism. And even now, you know, I was, if not for the Russians, I wouldn't sit here. Because the Second World War was basically fought in Russia till 1944. But, you know, so we really, if Hitler would have gone to England instead of to Russia, God knows what would have happened, you know? And Russia really fought Hitler, really. The siege of St. Petersburg and Stalingrad and all that, those were amazing, amazing courage. And I mean, the Russians lost 30 million of their people. You know, that was really, really amazing.
So you thank the Russians for your liberation?
Definitely.
For keeping you alive?
Definitely, definitely.
And they don't get enough credit sometimes?
No, not at all.
Usually
not
the Americans?
The Americans, sometimes when I tell that, I always mention it, you know, liberated by the Russians and how we traveled with them, how they looked after us and all that. And then they say sometimes, On which side were they actually? Was it on our side or on the German side? You know, they don't want to know.
You don't know the history?
No,
Wow.
no.
All right, so it's 1938. You're in Austria, the Nazis move in, and you know right away that this is going to get worse.
Well, it's not me, because
your
I was
father.
a child,
Yeah.
but the adults, you know,
Okay.
the adults knew the danger. And my father, as I say, he was a very, very energetic and good ideas. He was really a very, very clever man. I've got, which I never knew about, from his college where he was, a certificate. He did 6 languages which he passed, and business study and all kind of things. He was, you know, he was really sort of a genius, which I didn't know. I admired him, but I had no idea he was that clever. And he realized, and he had exported to Holland. In Holland, in the south of Holland, was a big shoe industry, and he had business with them, and they were not doing very well, and so he went there to help them to build up again. And so he went actually, I don't know exactly, a couple of days after the Nazis had come in, he went to Holland sort of on a business trip. That was still possible because it wasn't organized yet, the occupation.
Okay.
But so we had the family there, the parents, the grandparents and all that, and my father said he will see what happens and then he will try to get us out as well. But by the time he had an apartment and wanted us to come, things had changed. You had to have an exit visa, an entrance visa, passports and all that, you know, and that was all very difficult.
Was it, how
And
did you
we
get,
had to, we lost our Austrian nationality and we had to become Germans, which, not just Jews, everybody, which Austrians, I suppose they were proud to belong to this upcoming country, I suppose.
Okay. And things happen little by little. I think that's important for
Yeah.
people to understand. I had a Stanford professor here named Philip Zimbardo, and he did this experiment back in the 60s in Stanford, and he found that, you know, little by little, if you kind of take away people's personal rights, that's how they get to these great lengths. And it did happen slowly, right?
Yeah, well, quickly you can't do it because people might object, but doing slowly, you accept it. And you think as long as you do that, what they want, you'll be safe. But of course it wasn't.
Right, okay. How did your father get everyone from Austria to Holland?
Well, we didn't go to Holland, we went to Belgium,
Okay.
where you could get somehow. And, but you couldn't take anything with you. So we had, of course, we lived in a little boarding house, we had 2 little rooms, one for my father and mother. So he lived in the south of Holland, so he came weekends to visit us. And my brother and me shared another little room, and we had our meals together with all the other lodgers, and it was very poor.
Okay.
And I had to go to a French-speaking school, which I had, of course, no idea. And
What year is this?
39.
39, okay. And
Yeah.
so you're 10 years old.
Yeah. I was put into a class, put in the back, and that was it. And nobody took any notice of me. And, you know, I lost all my confidence. I became shy. It was really, really very difficult. And it was my birthday. And so I was there already several months, and I could speak already a little bit of French, and I'd made a few friends. And I wanted a birthday party in Austria. I had always lovely birthday parties. And so the woman from the boarding house said, I can invite 5 girls. And gave them all an invitation. And the day of my birthday, they all had a letter from their parents that they are not allowed to come to my party.
Why?
And well, I went home crying. There was they didn't give a reason. And my mother said, well, they just don't want to mix with Jewish refugees. So you can imagine what that feels for a child to feel the person you are is nothing.
Did anyone ever explain why? Why people were?
No, not really. As a refugee Jews, you are not welcome.
Wow. Okay. And so the world Europe is slowly becoming more dominated by the Nazi Party.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And then, of course, in the meantime, Hitler had gone into Czechoslovakia, and then into Poland, and then England and France declared war. That was in 1939.
Okay, so everything's happening.
Yeah.
And is there anywhere
and
you
we
can...
were still in Brussels, and my father in the south of Holland, and he said, well, in the war, the borders will be closed, and he had tried anyway to get a visa for us to come to Holland. But in February 1940, so during the war, we got a visiting visa to come to Amsterdam for 3 months. And so my father hired a furnished apartment because we had nothing. And on the Merwedeplein, which was a modern development with little apartments but no gardens, and a big open square, very nice, central heating, hot water, everything. And so we moved there. It was a piano. It was a woman who had this apartment, and her son lived in Switzerland, and she had gone to Switzerland to be with the son, and had sold the apartment to a non-Jewish person who, very cheaply, who was going to let it. And so that's how we got this apartment.
Okay. And
so it was not our apartment, it was on a non-Jewish person's name.
Okay. And the Nazis have occupied Holland at this point?
No, not yet.
Not yet?
No,
okay.
not yet.
All right.
We thought, this is it, that's good. So we were together as a family, we were settling down and thought things will be good again.
Okay.
And we had children, we went to the local school, and on this big square, all the children came after school, and that's how a little girl came to me one day and introduced herself, and it was Anne Frank, because the Frank family lived opposite. I just have a...
Okay. And so that, you met Anne Frank, and she is about your age then?
She was just 1 month younger than me.
Okay, 1 month younger than you. And what was she like?
Well, I looked up at her because she had not experienced anti-Semitism. She was only 4 when she came to Holland, so she learned the language quite quickly. And she was very sure of herself, very domineering. Was well interested in boys already. When I told her that older brother, she said, oh, when can I come to your apartment? And she always wanted a crowd around her.
Okay.
And but we played together skipping and hopscotch and marbles. And then she took me to her apartment, said her father will speak German with me. Because at that time I didn't speak Dutch. So in Brussels, by that time I spoke quite well French actually. But in Brussels, Belgium is a 2-language Flemish, and that is similar to Dutch. So I was not completely lost. I did understand a bit, speak not quite the same language, but it was not as bad as when I was in Brussels.
And so that's where you met Otto Frank,
Yeah.
her father, and you
Yeah.
spoke German with him.
Yeah.
And what do you remember about meeting him for the first time? Because he would later become your stepfather.
Yeah. Well, as I say, my father was a very sporty, he was not even 40 at that time, I think, and Otto was, in my view, a bit elderly. So my grandparents were at the time emigrated to England actually, but so I'd missed them very much. And so I thought it's sort of a grandfather figure.
Okay.
It was very kind and gentle, and yeah, but as I say, not what I expected a father to be.
And what happens over the next year or two in
Well,
Holland?
then in May already, the Germans invaded Holland, And we still tried to escape to England on a boat, but it was too late. And so we were caught there. And then, of course, I went into Belgium and France and Denmark and Norway. It was amazing how he had his army and how he could conquer the whole of Europe, which he did. So at that time, it really, so in 1941, it really looked as if Hitler was going to win the war.
So it
was
shock.
really very, very scary.
Okay.
And of course in Holland, the measures against Jewish people started to come very slowly. Like you said, not to shock people, not to get the Dutch population against them, which they were, of course, most of them. But nevertheless, there was as well a big Nazi party in all the occupied country. But every country had as well a big resistance movement. And those people, of course, were the people who helped us finding hiding places.
Okay. How did they slowly make those demands and changes and persecutions on the Jewish people?
Well, first of all, for instance, we were not allowed on public transport. We were not to go in cinemas or theaters, and we children were not to go swimming pools. And you know, for us that was, we had non-Jewish friends, and so we were sort of, they went to go to the cinemas, they went to swimming, and we couldn't do that. So they tried to separate us from the, then we were not allowed to go shopping in Christian shop, only in Jewish shops. And so
Would they check your ID? How would they know?
you had, well, you all had an ID, and then you had to wear a yellow star.
Wow.
So
Always.
so you were recognizable. But it was a nuisance, and you know, we were upset, of course. We had to hand in our radio, our bicycle, you know, it made life difficult. But we were still together as a family. And so in the evening, you know, my father taught us bridge, because we were 4 of us, you know, and we Monopoly had come out, we played that, and so we were kind of isolated from the general population, but there were a lot of Jewish people around, and you had to be in at 8 o'clock, and it was not too bad, really, you know. But then, of course, people started to disappear. And then we had to go to Jewish schools, and they took people away from the school, and kids just disappeared. And
Just disappeared.
yeah. And only after the war did we hear they were sent to Mauthausen in Austria, which is a terrible death camp. There were cliffs there where people worked in the stone quarries, and they were just thrown down from the cliffs.
Wow.
But we didn't know that at the time. But nevertheless, people disappeared.
Okay, so people start disappearing, families or adults, and then children.
Yeah.
And
And then about 10,000 young people got a call-up notice in June 1942 to report with a list. They gave a list of what you have to bring, underwear and shoes and all this kind of thing, to work in Germany in factories. Well, about 10,000. Very often the Dutch parents thought, well, they are young, they're strong, but they probably need really people to work in their factories, and they sent their kids. But of course, they were never ever seen again. Again, they were sent to Mauthausen. That was heard later. And but the refugee parents who had experienced Germany or Austria realized, you know, they deported people from Austria and Germany and went to the ghettos and to the camps at that time. And why should they want Jewish people again, you know? So they said, my father called us together and said, Heinz, you're not going. I found people who will keep us safe. So, and this is when we went into hiding. But we had to split up.
that was your father's decision to split?
Yeah. Well, no, it was not my father's decision. It was, you know, the apartments are very small, and nobody really offered our accommodation for 4 people. They said, we can take 2 of you, but not 4.
Who is this resistance? Who are these people? They're not Jewish people.
No. There were people who hated to be, to be occupied by a foreign country, and they were, they marched around in their uniforms, and they didn't like the whole way of this. And so the food rationing, and they took a lot of food away from Holland and fed their own people, and they were just against occupation, which is understandable. And that was in every country, in France and everywhere really. In Norway they were very big as well, and everywhere. And they printed ration cards, they helped Jewish people, they shot particular bad Nazis, did all kinds. And then when the Allied planes flew over to bomb in Germany, and sometimes planes were shot down in Holland or in France, resistance in France, they helped sometimes the pilots, they hit them, and as well they got radios from the Allies which were sent down, and weapons and all kinds of things. So they did all kinds of things, but many were caught, of course, and executed as well.